The Rafale, the ultimate French fighter jet of the modern age, and it makes sense that there be model kits available out there. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me today on the workbench as I build and review the HobbyBoss Rafale M in 1/72 scale. Let's get this one down onto the workbench. So I decided to have a go at this Rafale purely because I thought it'd be quite a quick and simple build to do, but also because I wanted to take part in French February, which we'll learn more about a little bit later on. I have already done a full unboxing on this particular kit, so if you'd like to learn more about what's inside the box, check out that dedicated video. In this one, I'm going to be focusing on what this kit is like to build and rounding off with a review at the end. I'll put a list of the products I used on the screen now to give you an idea of the kind of things you might want to go and get if you fancy replicating the results you see here. And without any further ado, let's get into it. As usual, my first steps will be to remove the parts that I need from the sprue using my cutters. Any rough bits of plastic or excess flash can be carefully removed with a sanding stick. Fortunately, the tooling is quite crisp, so flash is actually at a minimum. I've decided to try a new product for this particular build. Well, it's not necessarily new, but it's new to me. This is EMA Model Supply's plastic weld. The first things to do were to build up the cockpit part. Here I'm doing the seats, adding the various sides to the cushion. This plastic weld has to be used with a paintbrush and it evaporates very quickly, so you have to work quite fast to get the cement in the right place. I found the best way to use this cement was to add the part and then the plastic weld, which would then run into the gap between the two components and bond them together. The bond is very quick, almost instant. I think this cement will take a little bit of getting used to. The cockpit is built up with a number of parts which go together fairly nicely. The level of detail here is quite nice as well. And with the cockpit assembled, it was then attached to the internal side of the upper part of the aircraft. This blanking part goes over the top of the rear of the back of the cockpit. And with that done, it's time to prime. Army Painter Black Primer was sprayed onto the cockpit area. Quite a bit of the cockpit needs to remain black, so this is just the quickest way of getting that covered. When that was dry, some Vallejo Camouflage Olive Green was carefully painted onto the seat inside of the cockpit. Of course, it would have been easier to do this without it being attached, but it is possible this way. I generally like to attach things before painting because it ensures a good plastic to plastic bond for the cement. Some decals are included for the various instrument panels. These had been soaked in warm water and allowed to remove from the backing paper. They were then carefully applied, and then some Mr. Mark Softer decal setting solution would be brushed over the top to help soften them into the surface details. Adding the decals at this point was a little bit fiddly. Again, it would have been much easier to do this had I not already glued the cockpit inside of the fuselage part, but it is possible to do this with a little bit of patience and care. When that was done and the decals had cured, I would then dry brush some light grey, which is a Humbrol No. 1 primer colour, over the top of all the details inside of the cockpit. This will just help bring out some of those raised details, leaving the recessed ones in shade and adding a little bit of contrast. I then progressed with the rest of the build, adding the tail fin, and then turning my attention to the lower side of the aircraft. There are some holes here which are pre-moulded but do need to be drilled out in order to attach some weapons later on. The landing gear bay components are glued in from the inside of this lower wing part, and then the front canards could be added as well. I think if you don't glue them in place they could technically freely rotate, but I decided that I would just cement them in one position. The upper wing component could then be joined to the lower wing component. And we're making quite quick progress here. It's actually starting to look like a Rafale now. There are some smaller components which need to be added in a few places. These go onto the front edges of the air intakes, and the air intakes are built up in a number of components. You do need to make sure you select the right ones though, because they only kind of go on one side, so they would look weird if you got them the wrong way round. These air intakes were then added into their respective positions on the side of the aircraft. There is a component which represents the arrestor hook, and that was attached at the bottom of the aircraft. The nose wheel landing gear bay could then also be glued into position at the front of the lower side of the model. And then I added these parts to the lower wing. I think these are like the actuators for the control surfaces. The air-to-air refueling probe could be glued into its slot on the side of the nose. But I do have to be careful here as I move through the build so that I don't knock it off. Turning back to the lower side of the aircraft, I'm going to glue into place the underwing pylons for the weapons that I wish to use. You do get a selection of different things in this kit, and I've selected the correct pylons for the things that I want to use, but I will add the weapons later after painting. I will though assemble all the various parts for these weapons now. They do come in a number of different parts which need to be glued together, but it is a fairly simple process, making sure that you follow the instructions. Some of the little details on fins and things on these weapons are a little fragile, so you do have to be careful not to break them whilst handling them during the assembly stages. And with that all done, I'll put them to one side so that they can be painted shortly. One thing that I am doing slightly differently in this build though is by installing an AREOS pod underneath the aircraft. This is a Skyfury Models product, however this is actually a pre-production sample that I was given in order to test out and provide feedback to the designer. Whilst I did receive the STL files for free, everything I express in this video is completely my own opinion. And at the time of making this video, this is a prototype design, so isn't actually available, to the best of my knowledge. This AREOS pod would be superglued into the central position on the aircraft underside. Seeing as this is 3D printed resin, plastic cement won't actually work on it. With that done, I moved on to the engine exhausts. These come in a number of different components which need to be glued together, and this creates a fairly nicely detailed engine exhaust representation. I will leave this off for now though and do some painting on this before I actually add it to the model. To prevent the aircraft from sitting on its tail, I'm going to use some liquid gravity to weigh down the nose. The nose cone would be filled up with some liquid gravity, and I'm using PVA glue to attach it here. I've learnt my lesson from a previous build where I used super glue, and the fumes from the curing glue fogged up the cockpit canopy. So I've decided to use PVA, which should be a bit safer, but it does have a longer drying time. With that done, the nose cone could be glued onto the front of the aircraft. And now I'm going to turn my attention to the clear parts. Humbrol Clear Fix, which is a clear glue, is a little bit stringy, so I have to be careful with it, but it should glue the clear parts on nice and strong without reacting with them. I've already masked the cockpit canopy using my normal method, which is to apply tape and then carefully cut it along the canopy frames. You can notice that inside of the main cockpit canopy there are some components which need to be glued in, and these have already been painted the appropriate colour. And with that done, the cockpit canopy components would be glued onto the aircraft in a closed position. You do, however, get the option to display the cockpit in an open position if you would prefer. The only thing that you do have to do is add the heads-up display clear part at the front of the cockpit before you add the front windscreen. And with that done, it was time to prime. Again. So in this instance, I'm going to be using some Tamiya Fine White Surface Primer. This is going to be applied to all the landing gear components, some of which I assembled off camera because it was just a matter of gluing a couple bits together, and also the air-to-air missiles. I think this is easiest to do at this point because this will be the base colour that they need to be. I did have to make sure not to forget the landing gear bays on the lower side of the aircraft as well. I would then go on to mask those landing gear bays and move on to another primer. The matte black Army Painter primer makes a reappearance here, and this would be sprayed onto basically everything else. All of the external weapons that are not going to be white received a coat of this, as well as the engine exhausts, and with the landing gear bays massed on the lower side of the aircraft, the entire Rafale would be painted with this primer. This gives a good uniform finish, which should help the next layers of paint stick to it. And speaking of the next layer of paint, I'm going to be using this Vallejo US Air Force Light Grey. This was loaded into my airbrush, and I do on occasion just add a couple drops of acrylic thinner just to prevent tip dry. But what I'm going to do here is try and replicate some pre-shading. So I worked on the various panels adding extra paint to try and lighten them up. I would do this over the entire aircraft, and it should add an element of sort of contrast on the panel work. When I'd done that, some Vallejo Dark Gull Grey would be loaded into the airbrush as well, and this would be my main camouflage colour. I would spray over the top of all of that pre-shading, trying to take care to preserve some of it and make sure that the level of contrast showed through in certain places, just to make it look as though it had a more three-dimensional effect. When that was done, some XW30 semi-matte from K-Colors was loaded into the airbrush, and this clear satin varnish should help smooth out the paint a little bit in preparation for the decals. And speaking of the decals, you do get a reasonable sized sheet, which are printed to a good quality. Perhaps they're not quite up to the highest of standards, but they are perfectly usable. I cut the sheet into more manageable sections and then dipped the decals into warm water to help release them from the backing paper. And if, like me, you keep getting your cup of tea mixed up with your brush water, why not get a brush water mug so you never make that mistake again? The correct decals would be selected and then slid into the relevant positions as indicated in the painting instructions. This step was actually relatively straightforward. I have no complaints. I didn't find this part of the build to be stressful in any way. Perhaps it was a little bit tedious with the sort of number of stencils and things that had to be applied, but generally it was okay. Yes, the decals aren't quite necessarily up to the standard of other transfers from other companies, but they work perfectly fine. Some of the fine printing isn't as legible as I would have liked, but it does enough to give an impression. With that done, the Mr. Mark softer from before makes a reappearance, and this should help soften all of the decals into the surface of the plastic and make it look as though they were painted on. A few coats of this would be applied just to ensure that it actually worked into the decals and made them really stick down. I did notice there was a tiny amount of discoloration left over, like as a residue from this setting solution, but later on it will completely vanish when I apply some more varnish. Whilst the decals are curing though, some of this gunmetal paint would be painted onto the engine exhausts. Following on from this, the semi-matte varnish from earlier makes a reappearance as well, and this would be airbrushed over the entire aircraft to help seal in those decals and blend everything together. This is going to help give a more uniform finish and protect them in the next steps. Vallejo Black would be used to pick out the seekers on the air-to-air missiles, the sensors on the AREOS pod, and the tyres on the wheels. I then added the engine exhausts to the rear of the aircraft and got ready to do some weathering. This Humbrol 79 blue-grey enamel would be thinned down with white spirit to make a very thin wash. This would be painted over the entire aircraft and allowed to run into all the recessed details. This should help add further contrast and grime. Anything that I wasn't too happy with I could remove with a cotton bud soaked in more white spirit, but actually when I do it this way and the wash is really thin, sometimes all I need to do is just reactivate it and move it around a little bit more. After this, it was time to add the landing gear. This was a little bit fiddly to do at this point, but it can be done. The main landing gear was mounted into place inside of the main landing gear bays, having to kind of press and then twist them into place. Some support struts also have to be added, and again this was a little bit fiddly. And then the landing gear covers. were attached in the relevant mounting points. The wheels were carefully pushed onto their axles, and then I repeated this step for the nose wheel gear as well, with the landing gear leg assembly attached, the doors added to the bays, and the wheels added onto the axles. I then progressed on to adding the various munitions onto their relevant pylons on the lower side of the aircraft. Some of these have reasonably positive mounting points, so it's quite easy to get them in the right places. With the final missiles being added onto the wingtips, I then moved on to remove my homemade canopy masks, and they've done a reasonably good job. I'm pretty happy with the results here. And with that, I'm going to call my build of the HobbyBoss Rafale in 1/72 scale complete. And there we have it, that's another build under the belt. This wasn't a particularly complicated build, a fairly simple construction, and a fairly simple paint scheme as well. Granted, I would probably say that this isn't necessarily the most exciting model kit visually, because it's just all grey all over. There have been other boxings of this kit which have more exciting paint schemes, but I decided to go for this one just to try out what a HobbyBoss Rafale would be like, and also because I'd had that sample of the AREOS pod and I wanted to attach it underneath something suitable. So Skyfury Models, as I mentioned earlier on, they sent it out to me as a trial. It's all pre-production, they just wanted feedback, so I will just briefly mention that. My opinions are my own, it's not a product that's actually out for sale, but I did feedback to them that perhaps the panel lining on the pod is a little bit deep, it's a little bit thick, the details are a little bit chunky, which I passed back and said if you refine them a little bit to make them a little bit thinner, because 3D printers can replicate quite fine details nowadays, it would actually bring it more in line with the level of detail on the specific kit that I built here, which I think is fairly reasonable, and they took that on board, and I'm sure that they'll make some adjustments to their 3D printable files. So thanks Skyfury Models for your trial sample there, but I think we need to actually talk about the model kit itself. So this was actually fine, this was pleasant, it was nice enough. I do keep a log of everything that I do in my journal. My journals are basically notebooks that I've written and specially formatted to keep a log of everything that I do, and you can find them on Amazon if you'd like to also keep a log of your own builds. But in here I've written down that this took me about 2 weeks. It is a fairly simple kit, it has a nice level of detail, the details are modern, they're crisply reproduced, maybe a little bit shallow in places, but still fairly good. There wasn't exactly a lot in the level of flash, so that was really nice as well. Maybe the decals are not quite up to the standard that we expect from other companies, but they work perfectly fine. I didn't have any issues with them. I did have a little bit discoloration or residue left over from the setting solution, but that went away after a satin varnish and the weathering, so that was absolutely fine. I would just like to point out that in the instructions, I've made a note here that the ID numbers for the tail number, so I've got number 5 on the back of my plane, it's technically listed as the wrong number. I think it's just copied the same number from the first paint scheme, but actually if you just look at the picture, you can kind of figure out that it should be a different decal. So that's a small point. There is a small error in the instructions, but it's easy to overcome. So yeah, you do get 2 paint schemes included in this kit, but they are basically identical. They are basically the same. They're just a grey naval version of the Rafale. The only difference being the tail number. I think one of them is a 2 and the one here is a 5. I just went for the one with the number 5 on the tail because I think it comes with like one extra little bit of insignia. So I thought I'd add that just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So talking a little bit about the kit then, this kit actually is a 2009 tooling. So it has a lot of the features that we kind of expect from today with the level of detail and the fit of the parts. Everything in this build was really nice. Yes, you might be able to notice there's a few places where there might be a few seams I've not bothered to address. And of course, feel free to address them if you do decide to build one of these yourself. Hopefully, where I've not addressed them should point out areas which you might need to put a bit more attention into. The particular version I've got here is a 2010 onwards release, and you can pick these up in various stores. as I did last year, so it's something that kind of just seems to be in production. Yes, this isn't the most exciting boxing, and there are more exciting paint schemes out there, but I kind of wanted a bit of a Mojo build, which this kind of fits the bill. It's difficult to find a recommended retail price for this kit. It seems to be around the £19 mark, which is what I kind of paid for it, but prices do vary, so if you can get it cheaper than that, then that's absolutely fantastic. I don't think this is too bad of a price to pay for a kit which has the nice features that we've seen in this video. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit is that EMA plastic weld. That was a new product to me. I'd not tried it before. I wanted to see what it was like. It does work. It works quite well, but you have to be really quick with it. You have to get the cement in like the gap between the two parts like really quickly. If you dip your brush into the liquid and then in the time that you're moving over to the model, if you don't put enough on there, it's like evaporated and it's gone. So you do have to work really quickly with that cement. In that regard, I did find it a little bit tricky at times to use it, and I did use it exclusively on this build. So it works perfectly fine, but you just have to figure it out a little bit. The bond is basically instant, so I can imagine it would have like really good uses if you're trying to attach stuff, push it into place, something delicate, something fine, a little bit of cement, and then give it a second and then let go, and it's bonded. So it's really good for that, but I did find the fact that it was so quick a bit difficult when you wanted to like attach things that you needed a little bit more time with. So it's a good cement. I don't think I would use it exclusively on a build again, but I will definitely consider using it for specific parts just to get that quick bond. Maybe a little bit of review about my own skills. I think in this one I tried the pre-shading. It's okay. I don't think it's quite as noticeable as maybe I could have got it. Definitely a skill I need to develop in the future, but I did that sort of two-tone, a lighter grey for the pre-shading with the black base, and then the gull grey over the top, which actually I quite like the look of. And that subtle weathering as well helps to make this one look a little bit more weathered and contrast, but again it's very subtle. I could have gone a lot further and done a lot more weathering on this one, but actually I got to this point where it looked pristine and I kind of wanted to just call it there. So part of the reason I did this one was to take part in French February. So this is a French naval aircraft of the Rafale, and I really wanted to take part and sort of highlight another French aircraft. And as this video is going out in February, it seemed to fit the bill. But to find out a little bit more about French February, I'm going to hand you over to Miss Modeler. Over to you.
French February. What's it all about? French February is something I started a few years ago in a bid to encourage really myself to build unusual subjects. I have a passion for, I guess, alternative aviation, so things that are outside of my home country. So I've always loved the aviation of France, Poland, Sweden, and they're things that you don't often find in model kits. French aviation, particularly in Model 2, was fascinating. I've done a few videos on it and I suggest you go check them out. But I've been trying to spread French February, and for the last few years I've got a couple more content creators and my community to take part. So I'm really glad that you've decided to take the challenge with me, Model Minutes. I'm really excited to see what you build, and well, the rules are it's anything French or anything that has served in France. So it doesn't have to be military, it could be a tractor that was on a farm in France. It could be that out there. Anything French, built or served in France. Oh, and it's a great opportunity to build some helicopters too.
So thanks Ms. Modeler for sharing that information, and if you'd like to take part in French February, absolutely have a go. I think though it's probably a good place to wrap this video up. This is a nice little kit, it's not overly expensive, maybe if you can find it cheaper, absolutely go for it, but I found it was quite a nice kit to build. Maybe a little bit dull in the paint scheme department, but quite good practice for trying out some new techniques and some pre-shading. And once again, thanks to Skyfury Models for sending over their trial sample of that AREOS pod, because it does make it look a little bit different compared to the base model that you get out of the box. As always though, let me know down in the comments what you think of my build and review of this kit, and if my assessment of it was fair. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen, and if you'd like to join them or support the channel in other ways, check out the links in the description. I'd like to welcome our latest members to the club. They are Kim Ruse Jorgensen, who joins us both as a Model Club member here on YouTube and Patreon, Bon John Dovey, Fire Kamikaze, Albert Wesker, Alistra Elf, Marky J. Smith, Cardboard Kenny, John Denver 9931, and Dale Eric 4360. Welcome to the club. Honourable mention to Crazy Loca for some of the kind donations of some of these memberships you see here. Of course though, the best way to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling video. Final thanks goes to Ms Modeler for pushing the awareness of French February, and I'm looking forward to taking part with some more French subjects next year. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. These come in a number of different components which need to be glued together and create a fairly nicely detailed engine exhaust replica. Any rough bits of plastic or any rough bits of test, there we go. Good. HobbyBoss Rafale, take one. I'm hoping to do this in one take. Oh, it's back! It's back! I found it. Guess where it was? It was right next to me the whole time. It was like just down there.